everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Madeline and I create knitting content here on YouTube. In today's video, I have a really fun project for you. So today we're going to be making these little tiny baby booties. So I've made these quite a few different ways that I'll tell you about in just a second. But what's so great about these is they're an excellent way to learn how to knit socks if you've never knit socks before. I knit these exactly the same way I knit other socks. So we start out here up at the top of the cuff. We cast on, join in the round, then we knit down kind of like the leg portion of the baby booty. We knit a little heel flap. We do the basically quickest sock heel turn you'll ever do. We knit the foot portion, and then we do little tiny toe decreases. So it's a lot of fun because it is so many and it goes by really quickly. So it's a great project, either A, if you need baby booties as like a gift. I'm assuming there are no babies learning how to knit watching this video. So if you need to make these as a gift, it's a great project for that. Or if you want to learn how to knit a sock, it's also great for that. So let me just show you a couple of different variations that I've made. So the way I knit them is they have a longer cuff and then we just fold it over and it creates a really fun little look there. Hopefully it's focusing on the sock and not me. So this is one pair that I've made, and this one has a contrasting cuff, heel, and toe. So in the written version of the pattern, I'll show you exactly where to, I'll explain to you exactly where to break the yarn and rejoin it. You can also do it in one solid color, which is this one right here. It also looks really cute that way. And then if you want to create a larger size, so for example, these are both the same baby booty. The only thing I did is I knit this one on a larger needle size. So this pattern only comes in one size. And if you just want to make it larger, or you could even really make it smaller if you wanted to hold it even tighter, just increase your needle size just a little bit and you'll get a bigger sock. So first I want to talk a little bit about the yarns I use to knit these. So what's really fun about this project, other than how quick it goes, is that you can really use any yarn from your stash. So you just want to make sure it's a really nice soft yarn, and if it's machine washable, that's a plus. So the different yarns I used are, first, let me show you this hot pink one. So for this sock, this one I actually just used some Vanna's Choice yarn. So this is a great yarn that I always have in my stash. And this is like, I consider it to be a really heavy worsted weight. So it has a number 4 on its label, but then you see in like the recommended needle size, it actually says like a 9, I think, a US 9. So that would be a heavy worsted weight. So if you decide to do a single color for the whole sock and you use something like a heavy worsted weight, you're gonna need a total of 25 yards, or if you're using this exact yarn, I used 13 grams for a full set. Now, if you don't have a heavy worsted weight in your stash, but you have, let's say, a different weight of yarn and a whole bunch of different colors, then that's how I actually created this second version. So this is a little bit more complicated. So if you're a newer knitter, I would recommend just sticking to the one color. Look for a number 4 on the label. That'll be our worsted weight yarn. But if you have a bit more yarn already in your stash and you're looking to, use up some of those. So this is some of the Crofter yarn, and it comes in either Fair Isle or solids. I have a lot of different colors of this. And so what I actually did to knit these ones is I held 2 strands together, and that created a heavy worsted weight that's equivalent to that bright pink one. So up here at the top, I knit with the purple and the white color. So I just held together these 2. Then I switched to white and pink in the center portion, did my heel flap again in the contrasting color, and went back and forth. So in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to make this solid color version. So where the whole sock is one color. Now, if you are curious and want to try this other version where you do the contrasting color for the cuff, heel, and toe, that one has a separate written version, that one has a separate pattern linked down below. And in that pattern, I break out exactly when to like cast on with this color, cut that color, and join the next color. And I'll tell you exactly where to do each one of those things as you're going through the sock so that you can create this version if you want to use a couple different colors. The other materials you need beyond the yarn are, first, a pair of scissors to break the yarn, 1 tapestry needle, and this will be for Kitchener stitch, and then to also weave it on the ends, 1 stitch marker, and then the knitting needle size I use is a size US 7, and it is a circular knitting needle that I use because I do magic loop. But as you can see, basically when you're knitting this sock, it's only going to take up a really small portion of your knitting needle points. So you don't have to worry too much about the length of your cord, but I like to use, this one's probably about a 24-inch cord. Now if you don't like doing magic loop and you prefer to use double pointed needles, you can definitely do that here as well. So now let's get started with the cast on. So first up with the cast on, you want to try and use a stretchier cast on method. So the one I'm about to show you is called the long tail cast on. And so how I do that is I'm going to pull over, this one you really don't need too much yarn. So I'm going to say I'm going to pull over about 2 feet. As I'm editing this, I realized I forgot to mention that this specific sock that I'm showing you in the tutorial, I'm knitting it using 2 strands of yarn held together to equal that 1 worsted weight yarn or the medium weight yarn. So you can see a little bit there in the screenshot that I have it frozen on, the 2 strands separating. But all you do if you're using 2 strands held together is you just hold them together at the same time, just line up the ends and then just work with them as you usually would 1 strand. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that because I never said it in the actual video. But yeah, I'm just holding 2 strands together and treating them as 1 strand. But if you're just using the worsted weight yarn, just use 1 strand of tail. And then this is the ball of yarn I'm knitting from. I'm going to lay my yarn so that I have the tail coming out up over my hand and then the ball of yarn behind my hand. Going to grab the strand with my bottom 3 fingers. Now hold on to the one that's attached to the ball of yarn. Go back behind your pointer finger, then down below and up to the top. Do that one more time. Back behind, down below, up to the top. And then bring it down, back down one more time. Grab onto that strand with the other 3 fingers as well. And now you want to take the second loop that's on your finger, bring it up over the first loop. Take the new second loop, bring that one up over the first loop. And now take the new second loop again, and now just slide it right off your finger, and we have a slip knot. So now I want to put the slip knot onto my knitting needle. So I'm just going to take either one of my double pointed ends and just go right into that slip knot. And when I do it, I want the side of my knot with the tail towards me, and then the side of the knot with my ball of yarn further away from me. Then all I do is I just pull on the tail gently. You don't want to tighten it too tight, but you want to tighten it onto the knitting needle. And now as I cast on, I like to hold this knot in place with the pointer finger from my right hand. So this slip knot does count as our first stitch, and now we're going to want to cast on a total of 16 stitches. Now the way I do the long tail cast on is I'm going to grab both strands with my bottom 3 fingers again, and now I want to take my pointer finger and I want to point away from me, kind of like pushing back on that back piece of yarn, and this back piece of yarn is the same one that's attached to my ball of yarn. So I want to push away from me on the piece of yarn that's attached to the ball, and then take my thumb with the other strand and push towards myself on the strand that's the tail. Now I'm going to tilt my palm up towards the ceiling. So this is all essentially like parallel to the table now. And I like to move my knitting needle is how I do my cast on. So I'm going to move my knitting needle towards myself, underneath just the front strand around my thumb, come up the center, go back towards my index finger, pick up the first strand there, go back behind it, pick it up, and now bring it back through that loop around the thumb. Now the trickiest part is when you release the thumb. So you just slide it right off your thumb and then push back on that tail strand again, and you'll see that loop will tighten right onto your knitting needle. So to show that one more time, again, my palm is up towards the ceiling. I'm going to take my knitting needle, go towards myself, underneath the loop around my thumb, and then come up the center of that loop. Go back towards my pointer finger, wrap my knitting needle up over and then down below that front strand on my pointer finger. Now bring that loop down in between the thumb loop again. And now when I let go of my thumb, just let it slide right off. And then I push back down on this strand that goes into the rest of my fingers. So now I have 3 stitches cast on. And now I'm just going to continue doing that until I have a total of 16 stitches cast on. Okay, now I have a total of 16 stitches cast on. So what I want to do now is I want to take all these stitches and just slide them right over to my cord. Now I'm going to count into the center, so I'm going to count in 8 stitches from one side. Once I found that center location, I'm just going to slip my stitches a little bit so I can see the cord. Now I'm going to grab onto the cord right there, fold my cord in half, and then slide those stitches so that they're back up on the knitting needle points. And now when I set up for magic loop, you can see I have my working yarn and my tail coming out the knitting needle closer to me, so that isn't right. We want that one coming out the knitting needle that's furthest away from me. So the way I want to position my knitting needles is I want to have my 2 knitting needles kind of like parallel to the table, so like they're on a flat plane. And then I want the working yarn coming out my back knitting needle. That's the one I refer to, the one that's furthest away from me. And then I want all my cast on bumps facing down. And here it's easier to tell if you're twisted or anything, but you just want to make sure in this inner corner nothing's twisted and all those cast on bumps are down towards your table. Okay, so now I'm all ready to begin the first side in magic loop. So the way magic loop works is first we're going to go across the first half of the stitches, then we're going to turn our work and we're going to go across the second half of the stitches. Once we do both those things, that counts as one round. So you need to go across both halves of the stitches before that's one full round. When I start the magic loop, I'm going to take my back needle, or the one furthest away from me, and I'm going to pull it towards the right. And that way the back stitches are going to end up on the cord. And I don't want to pull that needle so far that this loop goes away. I want to keep it so that there's plenty of loop over here on the left-hand side. Now I want to take this needle that I just pulled over towards the right, and I want to go right into that first stitch on my front knitting needle as if to purl. Now one other thing you want to check before you purl that first stitch is you want to make sure your working yarn is coming out kind of like in between the cord and the front knitting needle. You want it coming out down below. You don't want it up over that back knitting needle. The reason we want it down below is because we're going to be starting off with a purl stitch. So when you start off with a purl stitch, you want your yarn coming out down below. So now again, I'm just going to take that right knitting needle, or the one I pulled through, and go right into that first stitch on my front knitting needle as if to purl. Purl that stitch. And now I'm going to continue going all the way across this front 8 stitches, purling each one. Now that I'm at the end, I'm going to purl that final stitch. And now I want to turn my work so my knitting needle again is pointed over towards the right, and I'm going to re-thread in the second knitting needle as well. So now when I have my work set up again, my knitting needle points are pointed towards the right. My working yarn is coming out the back knitting needle, or the one furthest away from me. And now again, I'm going to purl across the second half of the stitches. So to do that, I'm going to take my back knitting needle, pull it towards the right, make sure my yarn is coming out down below, and go into that first stitch as if to purl. Now I'm going to purl across the second half of the stitches. Okay, just finished going across those. So now I want to turn my knitting needle again towards the right, thread back in my second knitting needle, And that was our full first round. So that whole round on both sides, we purled. For the next round, we're gonna go across each knitting needle and we're gonna knit this time. So the only change I'm gonna do, let me just make sure I'm working with my ball of yarn and not my tail, is when I knit on the first stitch, I wanna take my working yarn and have it come up in between the two knitting needles and then back over the back knitting needle. So kind of like lay it over the top there. Now I'm gonna take my back knitting needle, pull it towards the right, go right into that first stitch on the front knitting needle as if to knit, and I'm just gonna knit all the way across this half of the stitches. Just finish that. Turn my work. And again, it's already kind of set up that way, but I want my working yarn going up over the back of that back knitting needle. Now I'm gonna knit across the second half of the stitches. Okay, so that was my full knitting round. So again, just the way you want to position your cord, if you're starting out with a purl stitch, you want it down in between your two knitting needles. If you're starting out with a knitting stitch, or a knit stitch, sorry, you want it to start out up over that back knitting needle. So now I'm going to continue with the pattern, and basically the way this top of the sock works is we just did the purl one, and then you can't quite see it in there, but then we did the knit one. So now I'm going to purl one more round, and then I'm going to knit a total of 9 rounds after that. So again, it goes purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 9 rounds. So I'll catch back up with you once I finish all those steps. Next up, I'm going to be working the heel flap. And the way the heel flap is worked is it's actually just worked flat on half the stitches. So what I mean when I say it's worked flat is that instead of knitting across these first half of the stitches, turning our work and working across the second half of the stitches, what we're gonna do is we're gonna work across the first half of the stitches, turn our work, but then we wanna work across those same stitches again. So essentially we're gonna go across them one way and then across them again, the opposite way. So the way this is actually worked is I'm gonna take my right knitting needle, I'm gonna slip the first stitch as if to purl, so just slip it right over. And now I wanna knit the rest of the stitches right across this one side. So I'm gonna knit basically the next 7 stitches. Now I wanna turn my work, but now I don't actually wanna thread back in this knitting needle. I'm just gonna continue to use this knitting needle, and now I'm gonna work across these stitches again. So when I work across them again, I'm gonna slip my first stitch purlwise. Then I bring my yarn to the back, and now I'm gonna knit across this whole row. Now again, I'm gonna turn my work, and you can see what I just created there. You see how there's bumps on this one side? So that's the heel flap forming right there. And then there shouldn't be any bumps on the other side because we didn't work any of these stitches at all. So now I'm gonna repeat those 2 rows again. So all I do, one more time I'll show you, is I slip the first stitch purlwise, bring the yarn to the back, knit across the remaining part of these half of the stitches, so knit 7. Turn my work, and again, slip the first stitch purlwise, bring my yarn to the back, knit across again. So far I've done a total of 4 of these rows, and in total I want to do a total of 8. So I just need to do 4 more rows. So I'll come back and show you what that looks like then. So next up, we're gonna work the little heel turn, and this heel turn is really a fun way to learn heel turns just because this one's so tiny. And so the first thing I do is I check to make sure I have the correct number of rows on my heel flap. So first, one way I can check is if I look at the sets of bumps, I have 4 sets of bumps. And then if I look at the side of my stitches, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 full loops over there. And that's exactly what I want for later on. So when I work the heel flap, the heel turn, the way I'm gonna do it is first I'm gonna knit right into the first stitch, knit the second stitch, third, and fourth. So I knit a total of 4 stitches. Then I want to do a slip, slip, knit. So I'm going to slip the first stitch as if to knit, slip the next stitch as if to knit, pass them both back over to my left knitting needle, and then knit both of them together through the back loop. That's a slip, slip, knit. Then I'm going to knit 1 more stitch. Now, instead of working that last stitch, I'm just going to turn my work in the middle of the row. I'm going to slip the first stitch onto my right knitting needle, just slip it purlwise. Now I'm going to purl 1. Next up, I'm going to work a purl 2 together. So I just want to go into the first stitch and then the next stitch over as if to purl, wrap my yarn around, and then just pull right through. It's a purl 2 together. And then I want to purl the next stitch as well. Now again, instead of working that last stitch, I'm going to turn my work. I'm going to slip the first stitch purlwise. Then I'm going to knit 2. Now I want to work a slip, slip, knit. Slip the first stitch as if to knit, slip the second stitch as if to knit. Pass them both back over to my left knitting needle point. Knit them together through the back loop. And now the next thing I want to do is I want to go down this edge of the heel flap and I want to pick up each one of these edge stitches. So you can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to pick up each one of those. So let me zoom in here real quick, give you a better look. So again, the way I want to pick these up is I want to pick up both sides, and in my case, both strands, because I'm holding yarn double. But you want to get both sides of the V, and you just want to basically put your knitting needle point underneath everything. Then put your right knitting needle point into that loop as if to knit. Wrap your yarn around and pull through. So I just picked up that first one. Now I'm going to go into the second one. Again, pick up both sides to the stitch. And then just knit it as you normally would. And so I should have a total of 4 stitches down this side. And then in addition to those 4, I'm also going to pick up this bar in between the 2 sides of my work. So I'm going to take my left knitting needle point, just pick that one up, go basically from the outside of your work to the inside of your work. And then with my right knitting needle point, I'm going to knit into the back of that loop. Okay, so now I'm all done picking up that side of the heel flap. Now I want to turn my work, and this time I actually am going to rethread back in my second knitting needle because we are knitting in the round now. So I now again have both my knitting needle points pointed over towards the right, and I'm going to pull through my back knitting needle. I'm going to knit all the way across these front 8 stitches. Now on this side, I'm going to start off picking up that bar in between the 2 sides of my work. So again, I'm going to take my left knitting needle point, go from the outside of the work to the inside of the work, pick it up, knit into the back of that loop. And now on this side, I want to go along and again pick up both sides to each one of these V's and just knit right into them. Okay, so now I've picked up those stitches on that side. So now again, I want to turn my knitting needle points over towards the right, thread back in my knitting needle. And now when I start on this side, the first thing I'm actually going to do is I want to work a purl 2 together, and I'm just doing it on this first initial row. And the reason I added this purl 2 together at the beginning is because basically when I was doing the heel turn, I worked 2 decreases over here on the left hand side. Like if you remember, we did 2 slip slip knits, but on the right hand side, we only did 1 purl 2 together. So we basically need to do a second decrease over here on the right hand side. So that's why I'm going to start off with a purl 2 together. Now I'm going to purl until 3 stitches remain on this knitting needle. So again, I did a purl 2 together, then I purled 5. Now again, I'm going to work another purl 2 together. And then I'm going to work the final stitch just as a purl stitch. Turn my work. Now I'm going to knit across the first 8 stitches. And this is where I find it's helpful to place my stitch marker. So after I knit across those front stitches, I just place my stitch marker. Now again, I want to bring my yarn to the front. I'm going to purl 1, then I'm going to work a purl 2 together, and then purl the final 2 stitches. Great. So now I'm going to turn my work again. And now this full round, I'm just going to work all knit stitches. So I'm going to knit all the way across this knitting needle, turn my work, and knit all the way across the second knitting needle. Now again, I'm going to work a decrease round. So I want to be purling. And again, on these rounds, it's important to pay attention at the beginning, whether your yarn's coming out in between, down below, or up over that back knitting needle. Remember, down, you want it to go down in between if you're starting off with a purl stitch, up over the back knitting needle if you're starting out with a knit stitch. So again, this one's going to be a purl stitch. So I'm going to purl over until 3 stitches remain. So I just purled 5. Now I'm going to work a purl 2 together. Purl the final stitch. Turn my work. And now again, I just want to knit across these upper foot stitches. Because if you look on this sock, the top of the foot is always just knit. And then it's the bottom of the foot where we alternate between knitting and purling, and it just kind of creates a really fun texture down there. So I'm going to knit across these top 8 stitches until I get to my stitch marker. Slip my stitch marker. Bring my yarn to the front, purl 1, then work a purl 2 together, purl that final stitch, and now again, after that round, I'm just going to knit 1 full round, so knit all the way across the back stitches, knit all the way across the front stitches. And now I just need to work that decrease round with the purl stitches. So I'm going to purl 4, do a purl 2 together, purl the final stitch, turn my work, knit all the way across until the stitch marker, purl 1, and then do a purl 2 together, and that'll be that full decrease round. Then after that, I'm all done decreasing until we get down to the toe stitches. Okay, so I now have the correct number of stitches on my knitting needles, and the way to check is you should have 6 stitches on your back knitting needle where you work the heel flap. Then you should have 8 stitches before your stitch marker, which are your front or like top of the sock stitches. And then you should have 2 more stitches over on the other side of this stitch marker. And all that together is the total of the same number we started with, so you should have 16 stitches again. So now I'm just going to continue alternating between 2 rounds. So what the 2 rounds are is first, just knit 1 round. So knit all the way across the back, all the way across the front. Then the second row is, you want to purl across these 6 stitches on the back, turn your work, knit across the 8 stitches on the front, and then purl those final 2 stitches. So those are the 2 rounds. I'm gonna repeat, and I'm just gonna do a total of 4 rounds or 2 full repeats. And again, if you wanna see this in written form, it'll all be in the pattern down below in the description box. Now before I start the toe, I'm just gonna do 1 more round where I just knit all the stitches. And then I'll be all ready to start the toe. Now for the toe decreases, I want to decrease 2 stitches on each side of the sock, but this first round is actually a little bit different. So what I'm going to do is I'm first going to purl 3, then work a purl 2 together. Now I want to purl the final stitch. Turn my work, and now up here on the toe I actually do work the purl stitches across the top of the sock as well, just to add a fun little detail. So here I'm going to purl 1, purl 2 together, purl 2, purl 2 together, purl 1 stitch, and now here I need to rearrange these stitches so that these 2 stitches here at the end on the other side of my stitch marker, which I can take off now, end up on the other side with the rest of my bottom of the sock stitches. So the way I do that is I'm actually just going to pull on this left knitting needle so the cord becomes smaller and they just end up back there on the other side. So now I have it arranged where I have all my front stitches on this one knitting needle and all my back stitches on this other knitting needle. So now on this side, I'm going to work a purl 1 and then a purl 2 together. And now I've finished that round. So now I'm going to knit 1 full round. So knit the remaining stitches on this back knitting needle, turn my work, knit all the way across this front knitting needle, turn my work again, and now again I want to work another one of those purl decrease rounds. So I'm going to purl the first stitch, work a purl 2 together, then immediately after that I'm going to work another purl 2 together, purl the final stitch, turn my work, and work that exact same thing on the other side. So I'm going to purl 1, then do 2 purl 2 togethers, purl the final stitch, and now that's all I have to do for all the knitting. So now I like to turn my work again and thread back in my second knitting needle. Again, I typically, when I start the Kitchener stitch, like to have both my knitting needle points over towards the right. And I'm going to cut my yarn. I'll probably only leave, that's about a 10-inch tail, I'd say. You don't need a very long tail at all, just because you're only Kitchener stitching off 4 stitches on the other side. I'm going to thread my tapestry needle. And so real quick, I'll just show the steps to Kitchener stitch. So Kitchener stitch, you want to take your tapestry needle and go through the first stitch on the front knitting needle, or the one closest to you, as if to purl. Keep it on the knitting needle though. Then you want to go through the first stitch on your back knitting needle, or the one furthest away from you, as if to knit. And I like to always make sure I'm going underneath the knitting needles when I do this. That way you don't end up with like a weird yarn over in the middle. So I went through that one as if to knit, left it on the knitting needle. So those are the 2 setup stitches. Now the 4 repeats are, first you go through the first stitch on the front knitting needle, as if to knit, slip that stitch off the front knitting needle, go through the new first stitch on the front knitting needle, as if to purl, keep that one on the knitting needle, go through the first stitch on the back knitting needle, as if to purl, slide that one off the back knitting needle, go through the new first stitch on the back knitting needle, as if to knit, leave that one on the knitting needle. So now I'll just put those 4 repeat rows up on the screen and you can continue following along. Now when you do get to the very end here, you can't do the full repeat. So for instance, I'm going to do my knit through the one on the front knitting needle, slide it off. I can't do that purl through the new first stitch, so I'm just going to purl through the first stitch on the back knitting needle and then just end my repeat there. Kind of like doing as much as I could. And then I like to take this tail and I just like to thread it to the inside of my work, right where the Kitchener stitch ended. And now all I have to do is weave in my ends and I have a finished sock. And I like to fold this top cuff over just to make it a little bit more fun. And then also you can see in the 2-color version, it just adds a fun little detail.